Let's get ready for the county fair. And yes, I'm drinking Crystal Light instead because it is almost 5 p.m., so I am definitely not drinking any form of coffee. And this is just the fruit punch Crystal Light. So let's get some makeup on. So let's get started. I'm pretty pumped about going to the county fair. Actually, it's just called the Bluegrass Fair, but I have not been to actually, the last time I was at a fair was 2019 for the Minnesota State Fair, and that summer I'd also gone to the Orange County State Fair when I had been back in town, because that summer of 2019 I had actually been interning with Boeing in the Puget Sound area, and that kind of gave me the idea of kind of what to talk a bit about for this video, because it is summertime now. All of the especially the undergrad students in different like engineering fields especially are going and doing their summer internships, and I thought I would kind of recount one of mine, which my summer internship, that was something else, because like I said, I was working in Puget Sound in 2019, which also happened to have been the summer of the 737-800 ground Maxes being grounded. So I got to see really firsthand how everything was going. It was rough because also with my position, generally I was working in the commercial side, as was my roommate at the time. She was also commercial, so we were seeing that. A girl I went to high school with who was also interning in Puget Sound, she was working on the military side, and she had a very different experience in terms of like kind of the anxiousness around it. Similarly, my dad, who worked for Boeing for 26 years, something like that, he was working at McDonnell Douglas before it became Boeing. Not for very long, but he was there before the merger. So like he had a kind of a different feeling as everything was going on than like I did, and like a very different experience, because also again he was in the Southern California branch of Boeing than me, who was in Puget Sound, which Puget Sound already is kind of like treated as a different beast, because Puget Sound is where Boeing was started. It was originally like a lumber company, and that's actually kind of a fun thing, is when you go to the Museum of Flight, which I don't know if Boeing owns it or just is a major sponsor of it, but they've got like the Little Red Building, which is like the original lumber part of Boeing. I don't know, I found it kind of fun. Yeah, also this look, I am inspiring it based off of that. My pants for today, I found them at Goodwill a while back. I vlogged that. I just didn't end up showing you guys what the pants looked like. And they had these weird seashell things along the edge of each of the pant legs, and I just took those off because those were loud and annoying. With working at Puget Boeing Sound, like my interview process was great. I had applied back in October-ish time frame. Again, this has been since I did this in 2018. This has been years. I am a very different person now than I was when I was filling out those forms. But it was in 2018. My dad had given me the heads up of like, hey, this is where the forms are, as did my old manager from when I was a high school intern, which I can talk about in a different video. You guys kind of saw me talk about that earlier in a video from Vlogmas. You can see it up there in the corner. Like, I had an amazing time working in that instance, and they wanted me to come back, and I was all gung-ho about it. I really wanted to. I had a friend who had worked in Puget Sound the summer before, and he's like, don't know how you'd feel about it, but I was like, yeah, I got to. So I interviewed, and I was interviewing for both Puget Sound and Puget Sound, Southern California, specifically in Huntington Beach, and in Ohio, because those were the managers I was meeting with. And interview process went well. I found out early in January, because I did this in December. Early in January, got the offer for working in the Puget Sound area, and I was like, awesome. And I signed pretty much immediately to be like, yes, I'm doing this. I knew what I'm doing this summer. Then I had to get all of the like other forms filled out, and that was fine. A little bit stressful, very frantic occasionally. Also trying to get the drug test done, because you have to get a drug test, and that was like one of the first things you had to do. My gosh, I went to one of the places and I was about to pee myself because I had drunk so much water beforehand, because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pee on command. Went to that, like got all that done. And I think it was in March, I get an email from HR for Boeing, and they're like, hey, the manager you signed with has retired. We need you to re-sign with this new manager. And it's like, okay. And that kind of started to bode what was going to happen, because then I get to Seattle. It's fine. I had some problems with trying to get a rental car, mostly because they were not going to rent it to me unless I had a credit card, and at the time I did not have a credit card. I only had a debit card. So lots of Ubers, and that was stressful. I did end up getting a car because there was one guy in, oh shoot, I cannot remember where he was specifically. His location was even further south than like Renton. So like not Renton, Auburn. This was further south than Auburn. I was living in Renton at a place that was partially subsidized by Boeing. That is actually a really good thing that they do for their interns, is they have these housing places where they will subsidize about half of it. So my rent every month was $600 instead of $1,200. And I had an apartment where it was a second floor walk up, not bad at all. And it was a 2-bed, 2-bath. I didn't have the adjoining bathroom, but it was pretty good. The only thing and this was my own fault and my roommate's fault, is we didn't realize that when they were talking about furnished, we weren't getting sheets or anything, so we had to kind of scramble to get sheets at Target. But besides that, it was fine. But no, so I get there, and I'm like I go get my badge, because you get your badge beforehand, which again, that's pretty typical. You go get your badge, and then you go and have your photo and everything. And then on that Friday, because they start their week on a Friday instead of a Monday. So go to the orientation. And for my roommate and I, it was not too bad. We were not super far away, like living wise, because again, we were at Boeing Fields in Tukwila. And that was fine. But then I had to actually get to my site that day, which was teensy bit stressful, because everybody else is like, no, our manager didn't have us coming until afterwards. But mine was like, no, you got to come in. And then to add into the whole situation, she was not even there. Instead, it was me just meeting with my mentor very briefly. So that was not great to start off, because I don't think I even met the manager until like maybe a week or two later, because she was on vacation, which good for her for taking vacation, just not well planned out on anything. Also, though, happy that they did know that I was coming along, because apparently that has happened a couple of times. But as I slowly got into where I was working at Boeing, I'll be honest, I liked the people I was working with, although I could very early on tell that there was some animosity that had developed, specifically with management. As like the manager that I had, she was in charge of two facilities, 2 sites. One was in Tukwila, the other was in Renton. And the second one she was working at, her father was also in the group. She was not managing her father, but he was in the group, which was kind of a no-no, because of course, like that personal connection was just a little bit of that's not always a great thing. And then, so early on then afterwards, it was announced that like she was moving to a different group, and that in the meantime we were going to have this other guy be our manager. He did not want to be our manager at all, and kind of ignored us. And so I kind of was just like, I don't know what I'm doing. He also at one point was like, because I'd asked, so the 4th of July was a Thursday, we were not going to get Friday off. And so, but I had asked, hey, can I get 4th of July, not 4th of July, the 5th of July off? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, I'm going to be the only person in the office then, because most of the people in that office do not work on Fridays. They usually do either a 940 or they do a 980 or a 440. That's kind of the setup they do. And I will be, or they're on vacation generally, I'll be the only person in there. You do not want a 21-year-old in charge of some of the equipment that I was working with. I'm also trying to be a little bit vague on the work, because some of it was proprietary, and just to be on the safe side, I think it would be better for not to mention it. But yeah, so that was one of those things where once I had to be like, legitimately nobody's gonna be here, he was finally like, okay. The other time that he was a little bit like unsure about giving me any sort of like allowances for things was when it was again, I didn't know what I could do or not do, and like a lot of these things you had to talk to the manager, and I'm like, I don't even know who my manager is. So I never got to see Boeing Building 1, even though there were tours and everything. But by the time I was able to figure out what the heck was going on, it was a little too late for me to set up any of these tours. Also turns out there was a problem with my emails because the systems had not merged to the fact that my two like emails from when I was an intern in high school and this coming in as a college student, they had not synced up. I had the same Boeing ID number actually, like that was kind of a funny thing. I had this same Boeing ID number both times around, but they couldn't match up my email, so I could not get any external emails actually until I figured out to sync, and then it worked out, which caused a whole other problem for things like they were like, oh, trying to get me a work phone, but then I never got confirmation of anything until like much later, and they're like, oh, you should have done this, and I'm like, how was I supposed to know? Never got a confirmation email because there was like this weird technical problem. Because yeah, I didn't realize the email situation until week 9 out of 11 weeks. That one maybe should have checked earlier, but I had no reason to think otherwise. But besides that, with my work and everything, like, so the manager stuff, because the other thing had been, they had this tour that you could go on that was actually in Renton. It was in a really random spot in Renton, in my opinion, but I went to it because it sounded fun. I was finally like, you know what, I'm gonna do some of the things they have set up for interns because I'm an intern here. And that day I was like, okay, it was gonna be awkward timing, and from Renton to Auburn, it was a 30-minute drive. And so I'd ask kind of like, hey, can I just work from home this day? I've mostly got technical stuff to do, where it's just me kind of writing things out. And because initially it was like, I don't know, and I'm like, I'm going to be in Renton. I live in Renton. It's a bit of a drive back and forth. So is it really worth it for me to do that commute? And he's like, okay, yeah. And then I will also preface this, by the time I left, we got another manager also. And in this whole situation, different people who were in that office were getting very, very pissed at the different managers, and one of them did leave a meeting yelling. He kind of, I will acknowledge though, had a very abrasive personality. He was a little bit abrasive. I was on his good side most of the time, so it didn't matter, but he had a lot of annoyances with things. And again, nothing was helped in the fact that everybody felt very pressured from the fact that since the 800s were grounded, we were not getting a lot of money in, and so we couldn't have a lot of overhead in anything, which, for example, with my roommate, that was a problem because she was working much more on the IT side, and so all of their stuff was just overhead. I will generally say I feel like I'm bad luck when it comes to companies I work for, because and just situations I've been in, because in the two companies I've interned with, both were like entering in or in the middle of a major crisis, and then I graduate college into a global panini. So like, yeah, it causes problems. Also, yeah, I think I'm liking this look. It's a very frosty look, but I think it's kind of fun. And I know I'm just rambling over the place. I didn't take notes beforehand about what I was going to talk about. Okay, so eyeliner is on. I'm just going to let this set for a bit because I don't think you guys can see, but I used a yellow eyeliner, and some of it got on my lashes. That's just a problem with using these eyeliners, but I thought because the pants that I have that are these fun like summer prints is more in that cigarette pant like capri style, that I'd go a little bit more vintagey, although again doing the yellow eyeliner, but there's like yellow in there, and like so I'm using the yellows or the blues and the pinks, so like that's kind of my vibe. Yeah, I was just thinking about that internship. That was kind of when I had started to be like, maybe it was the fact that I was in Boeing, like Seattle, and that just generally has a very different vibe. That was my problem. I will say though, in this internship, I loved living in Seattle, and I also loved my coworkers. I very much did. They were great. They took care of me. One of the guys, very fatherly, always threw me off though, because he was an amputee and his leg was missing actually from like the hip approximately. And what threw me the heck off was the fact that he would be in a wheelchair most of the time, which is like, of course, pretty typical. Like, people who are amputees, sometimes they use prosthetics, sometimes they have crutches, sometimes they use wheelchairs. Not everybody who uses a wheelchair is paralyzed. However, I was so used to seeing him in his wheelchair that when he would stand up, I was like, wait, A, yeah, you're standing up, and B, I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, you're quite tall. Yeah, just always would throw me off. And he also had the best joke ever, because we were talking about, I forgot how the conversation had gotten into it, but we were talking about some of the union stuff, because Boeing, Seattle, or Washington generally, is a state that it has a lot of unions. The engineers in Seattle are unionized with SPIA. So I was actually a member of SPIA. I don't know if I still am, but I was a member of SPIA at the time. And do not fear the unions. I know my parents did not like SPIA. My dad was actually part of it back when it was still in Orange County, the Southern California area, and whatnot. And how the American education system really is, they always kind of like try to make unions sound bad, but as we're seeing right now, unions are great and they're fighting for rights. Like, we have some of the union stuff or whatever, and one of the things is the unions will pay for our different protective gear if we need it. So I was getting steel-toed shoes, which I actually still have, and I was given a budget of $75, which is what the yearly stipend is. As we found out later, you can either buy one new pair every year for $75 or get a $75 stipend, or every other year getting $150, which, when one of the women in the group found that out, she was like annoyed because she'd never been told that before, and she's like, I buy good quality stuff, why did nobody tell me? Also, that is a thing. In my office, there is only one other woman working full-time in the office. There was another woman who worked part of the time in our office, shadowing one of the guys to like be his like protege, and then the other half of the time she was working in a different section. That's just another thing, is I was in a very male-dominated space, which one of the times we had some people visiting, and a woman asked, oh, how many people are in your department at school, as a woman in engineering? And I remember my roommate, who at the time was doing more computer science stuff, was like, I've never had anybody ask me about that. And I'm like, I get that asked pretty frequently, like, of how many women are in the department at different places, because in material science and engineering, it's not that it's no women in there, it is still just a more male-dominated field traditionally. When I was at that point, I didn't notice it as much because my department had a pretty even split, and also we had people like Professor Francis, she is a woman in engineering, and she's been a woman in engineering since like the 70s, 80s, so she's like kind of one of the more trailblazing female professors. So, oh gosh, I was thinking, let's get back to that story about the steel-toed shoes though. But with the steel-toed shoes, with specifically the one man in the office that was an amputee, he was like, wait, does that mean I only get like 75 every other year? I cannot do, for some reason in my head, what 75 divided by 2 is. 37.5? Yeah, 37.5 like a year for shoes, which I just found quite funny. I liked that. I describe it as the fact is that when I was in high school as an intern, I had these very rose-colored glasses, with the fact that also because of child labor laws, because I was not getting paid, I couldn't do the job that a paid engineer would be doing. So therefore, they would always give us fun projects to do and experiment with new things. I was now a paid engineer. Not that I was doing anything bad or boring, it's just I was seeing more. I also, at that point, was actually having to think about what my next steps were, because I was about to go into my senior year of college. Like, figure out, okay, what am I gonna do now? I will say, living in Seattle, though, was incredibly fun. I loved being there. My only problem was just, like, it got dark really late into the evening, so I was having to get up pretty early in the morning to get to work, and it would just start to get dark at that moment in time. So that was not so great on my mental health in that sense for trying to get sleep, Because like I said, I would be getting up at, God, close to 6 o'clock in the morning, 5:50, like 5:45, something like that. It was something crazy early. And that just like, and the fact is it was not getting dark until like 9:30 at night. So I definitely struggled a bit. And that was also the summer I met an incel, so that was not fun. That just is a thing that you have to deal with periodically. It's just my first time of really interacting. Yeah, I don't know. I am very vague about some of the stuff. Like, I will say I liked the projects I was doing at Boeing most of the time, because it was something that I was very interested in, and I had had a little bit of experience in the field generally. The work I was doing, though, was a little bit more into the chemical engineering side that I was not as familiar with, but I did get to pull in some materials knowledge that I had. I also learned a lot about photography that summer. Do I remember any of it? Not really, but I learned a lot more about photography because everybody in my office was into photography. And I would still say, like, Boeing Puget Sound is or Boeing generally seems like a good company to work for, and I would recommend, if you have the opportunity, to live in Seattle and also go to different places to intern. I made new friends there. I also really got good practice of cooking and getting an idea of what it's like to live on my own. Like, yes, I had a roommate. I actually would cook for the both of us because I preferred cooking for like 2 people, because if I cook, I don't really want to eat the leftovers, but she would totally eat the leftovers, so it's great. And then also with Seattle, highly recommend going to all the museums. I went to the Museum of Flight twice, which was great. One time, once was for the one of their big events, and they actually had the traveling exhibit for the Apollo 11 flight. With they had everything for Apollo 11, which was super exciting because that was the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. So I actually got to see the lunar module. And then also I went back again a different time. Seattle, of course, besides just the general flight, does also have a strong connection with the NASA specifically, and the space shuttle program, because, for example, the commanding officer of the Challenger was a local, actually. So they have the training shuttle at the Museum of Flight. Boeing also generally does have a very strong connection with the space shuttle program, as I learned later on doing a presentation on material analysis for material failure analysis, is that the programs that were used for understanding the failure, or kind of modeling what would happen with the different ice chunks hitting the space shuttle tiles, was developed actually at Boeing Huntington Beach, and a lot of the space shuttle work was developed actually at Boeing Huntington Beach, which is kind of crazy because I'm like, I worked there at one point. But yeah, I'm just gonna put on my lipstick, and I think I'm ready to go. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching. I know this was very rambly and all over the place, as I kind of just let out my feelings about that internship, while still trying to make sure that I was not divulging too much, because yeah, I still don't know what I could or could not talk about most of the time, so I keep it very vague generally. But yes, thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I will probably talk more about some of my other internships later, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!